My name is Whitney Guthrie. I work with the agency Families First. In that role, I am the team lead of our survivor advocacy program. And so every day we work with survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, human trafficking. And as a part of that, one of the things that we see a lot is the impact of domestic violence on children. So I'm really appreciative to Child Care Answers to ask us to be a part of this, to have this conversation this evening, to talk about domestic violence, because the reality of just how present it is in our society, I think it's important to talk about, though it's difficult to talk about. For that reason, I do want to include a content warning at the very beginning here, because I want to recognize that domestic violence in general and the topic of trauma are not easy topics. It might be that it will remind some people of their own experiences. People might have different reactions, responses to some of the information. So right at the very start, I just wanted to speak to that, to be aware there might be some potentially upsetting information shared. We have a couple videos that I'll be sharing to let you know the images are either animated or they're depicted by actors. So it's no real live footage, but it could still be upsetting. And so please take care of yourself first, whatever that might look like. Your priority is your well-being first. This information can be shared in other avenues. As Vicki shared, a copy of the PowerPoint will be going out as a PDF. Further links for more investigation, more learning will be passed along. And then anyone on my team as well at Families First is happy to speak directly with people outside of this window of time. So please prioritize your well-being. And then as a last point, I will ask that this space that we have tonight not be used as a space to share personal stories of abuse. And that's not to say that your story isn't important, because it is, but to honor this window of time to be focused on the impacts of domestic violence on children and what we can do to mitigate that. So thank you again for your participation, for your willingness to be here, and our focus on the well-being of all children. So to give you an idea of what we're going to cover, as a few different points, we're going to be starting out with domestic violence, because I want to give everyone a basic overview that we can all have a baseline to build off of. We'll be speaking specifically around power and control, and then around the impacts of children, we'll be focusing on both developmental impacts, long-term impacts, and because it's all very heavy, we are also going to really focus on resilience. So we will be touching on ACEs. For some of you, that may be something you're very familiar with. For some of you, that may be new. So we will get into that. But we're also going to talk about the positive formative work that we can do in the lives of children. The great thing is that no matter the hard things we go through, the human brain is incredible. It is elastic. It wants to heal. So there's never a too late date for a child or an adult to begin the process of healing. And you'll hear me say this multiple times, but I want to remind everyone that a strong relationship with a safe, caring, consistent adult is one of the most important factors in helping children grow. Despite their experiences, their circumstances, help them grow in a positive way. So we are going to jump in with a video right off the bat. It is a video from Harvard University. They have a Center on the Developing Child. And so this video speaks to the links between policy, parenting, and brain architecture. And that's going to become a lot clearer as we talk about those formative events, both in the family and in the community, and how that affects child development, either positively or negatively.
What if you could take action to reduce crime, improve health and education levels, increase family incomes and state revenues, and improve the quality of life in communities throughout your state? Where would you begin? Science tells us that we may find the solutions to these complex social problems in early childhood, when the architecture of the brain begins to form. architecture is built over time and shaped by experiences, starting in the earliest years of life. The most important experiences come from the environment of relationships that interact with each child: parents, extended family, and caregivers of all kinds. But serious adversity early in life can disrupt healthy brain development. Both brain architecture and behavior are increasingly difficult to change as individuals get older. So what happens early matters for a lifetime. Now imagine you can take action to improve the lives of children and the quality of life in this community. Where and when would that action be most effective? The links between policy, parenting, and brain architecture become much more clear when we can see how formative events and family and community environments affect child development. For example, policymakers want to make their communities safer, or improve children's learning, or reduce the cost of chronic health problems. A child raised in this environment may experience lower levels of stress and more opportunities for learning. That leads to sturdy brain architecture and a healthy stress response system, which prepare the child to achieve higher levels of literacy and other skills early in life, and later leads to improved school achievement and decreased dropout levels. Positive early experiences can also reduce levels of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Increased health and education levels can have positive effects across society, like reduced crime and increased income and tax revenues. Policies affect both individuals and communities, so making wise choices that support early brain development can improve health, behavior, and learning throughout life.
All right. So maybe I should have asked this at the very beginning, but could someone sound off quickly in the chat that you were able to hear the video? Wonderful. Great. Thank you, Vicki. Okay, so we're going to jump off, as I said, to talk about domestic violence and give a basic overview of it. And then the information that was shared in that video, Brain Hero, will come back in later as we get more specifically focused on the impacts of it on children. So when I talk about domestic violence, you may hear me use kind of interchangeably words like intimate partner violence. We tend to shorthand it to DV or IPV, domestic abuse, relationship abuse. But truly, the idea of domestic violence is that it is a pattern of behaviors that's used by one partner to maintain the power and control over another partner in an intimate relationship. It does not discriminate. It is across the board in every race, age, sexual orientation, religion, gender. Any and all people can be a victim or a perpetrator of domestic violence. It happens within marriages, within relationships where people live together, within dating relationships, all socioeconomic backgrounds, all education levels, all. When we talk about domestic violence, a lot of times what comes to mind is we may have seen a movie that depicted it and it was a lot of physical abuse, which absolutely can be and is, where one partner is using physical touch to cause fear, injury, hitting, shoving, strangling. The list could go on for a very long time. It's also sexual abuse. So any kind of sexual activity or interaction that does not have active, willing, and unimpaired consent is sexual abuse. So if there's any type of coercion, any type of unwanted sexual touch, sexual assault, tampering with contraceptives, all of that is sexual abuse and falls within intimate partner violence. There is emotional and verbal abuse, so threats, insults, monitoring, isolation. It could be that just a grunt is enough to know, oh man, right? Because you know your partner and you know what that meant. We see within our work that economic abuse is a huge part of domestic violence, where exerting the power and control over the partner when it comes to the finances. So, is their partner's name on any of the checking accounts? Do they have access to any of the money? Are they allowed to work? Maybe their partner forces them to stay home, or maybe they force them to work, but then turn over their income to their partner. And so they don't have access to any of the finances. It can be stalking, so being repeatedly watched, monitored, harassed. I am one of our bilingual advocates that we have, so I work with a lot of immigrants, a lot of Spanish-speaking people, and immigration status is a huge point of domestic violence, where the threats of, if you don't do what I tell you to, I'm going to call ICE, I'm going to get you deported, I'll keep the kids and I'll get you deported. Or maybe they're in a relationship where the partner was going to fix their immigration status, turning in paperwork, and then they don't. Maybe they keep their passports and documents. Digital abuse, we are seeing that grow hugely with the influx of smart technology that we are introducing into our lives so often. So it can be the bullying, the threatening through texts, social media, GPS apps that are tracking people. It can also be using Alexa or your smart thermostat in the home, that suddenly your house is 100 degrees in the middle of the night, or your radio turns on at full volume at 3 o'clock in the morning. So digital abuse is becoming a huge, continuing to grow as a concern. This is a repeat of what I just said earlier, but it does not discriminate. It truly does impact every aspect of all of our societies. Some of the studies that will speak to the statistics are more focused on women, because the stats tell us that women are predominantly the people who experience the domestic violence, but I do not want to erase the fact that every person, every gender, race, age, can also experience it. I also want to speak to, quite early here at the start of the presentation, some of the misconceptions that people carry around domestic violence, because I think that this will help us as we move forward. Right off the bat, anger does not cause domestic violence. It's not just that someone loses control of their temper. If someone has an anger control issue, that is a real thing. And if they got caught off in traffic, they're going to blow up. If they have a rude coworker, they're going to blow up. And if they're throwing stuff, they're throwing everything and anything. Whereas a person who is choosing to be abusive towards their partner may, on the outside, in community, in their job, look like just the best person, and they get on well with everybody. And then they come home and they shut the door and it's a different person. And they're not throwing anything. They're not throwing their phone. They're throwing my phone because it hurts me. It isolates me. So there's still intention and choice behind doing it. They have not lost control of their temper, which is point 2. Additionally, drugs and alcohol do not cause domestic violence. It can make it much worse, absolutely, if someone is also using drugs or alcohol, but it is not the cause. Because, again, a lot of us know people who enjoy drinking and are not at all violent. And there are a lot of people who have never touched a drop of alcohol or used any kind of drugs, and they are very violent towards their partners. So with that, DV is not just a women's issue, because if women could have fixed it, it'd be fixed by now. This is something where we all have to be a part of this conversation, because the person who can change it is the person doing it. So if I am being abused, I cannot control what my abusive partner is doing. If I am the person being abusive, I am the person able to make that change. And if I am a bystander seeing it happen, or I can speak to a loved one who is choosing to do that, then I also have a space where I can be a part of that too. Again, I've already spoken to number 5, but domestic violence happens in all populations. There's not a specific race, gender, financial status who are impacted solely by it. And number 6, which is incredibly important, a person who's experiencing violence cannot always just leave when they want to. It's probably the thing that I hear most when people ask about my job is, well, why don't they just leave? But it can be incredibly difficult, dangerous, and even life-threatening. I'm going to share some stats here in a second when it comes to that. So speaking to a couple statistics here, according to the CDC, 1 in 4 and 1 in 7 men will experience physical violence by an intimate partner some point during their lives. And that's just physical. So we're not talking about all the other things that we just touched on of what DV can look like. So 1 in 4 and 1 in 7, it is incredibly prevalent in our world. It's not something that we talk about a lot because we feel like we need to keep it behind closed doors and that there's a shame attached to it, but it is incredibly prevalent. And I want to quickly speak to the fact that in other marginalized populations, the numbers are even stronger. So I did not go very far in pulling in the stats of marginalized populations, but they're out there. So people with disabilities, the Native American population, other immigrant populations, and a lot more, the African American population, the stats go even higher. But I did want to speak to the fact that compared to heterosexual women, lesbian and bisexual women have a much higher rate of domestic violence. Gay men and bisexual men have a higher rate of domestic violence. And then going back to that misconception of, well, why don't they just leave? On average, a woman will leave 7 times before she can successfully accomplish it. And that's because there are a lot of things that go into it. It could be that she's been planning for months. She's been trying to store some money and the abusive partner finds her stash of cash. Or she's trying to figure out how to pay the rent and find a job and pay for childcare and do the single parent role all on her own. Maybe she doesn't have a support system anymore because she was so isolated by her partner that now when she's ready to leave, she doesn't know where she can go. And that doesn't even take into account the emotional impact of being told day after day that you are worthless, that you are garbage, that no one will love you, that I'm the only one who will ever love you. Because there's a huge impact from those words as well, the emotional pain that comes. This statistic, women are 70 times more likely to be killed in the 2 weeks after leaving than at any other time during the relationship. In my role, the last thing that I will ever do, the thing I will never do is tell a client, you need to leave. Because they know what is safest, they know what is best, they know their partner best. And when we get more into the topic of power and control here shortly, the reason that this is so high, that someone attempting to leave results in really high levels of murder-suicide. 72% of all murder-suicides involve an intimate partner, and 94% of the victims are female. And the reason for that is because the abusive partner feels they've lost all of the power and all of the control. They tried to leave me, well, I'm getting them back or else. If I can't have you, no one will, right? And that feeling of having lost control means that the person goes to the extreme to try to get them back, and then the highest level of violence occurs with murder, and then sometimes suicide by the abusive partner as well. So again, the why don't they just leave? One part of it is because it's incredibly dangerous. And to be clear, I feel like this is clear, but I just wanted to have it stated that domestic violence is a crime. In the US, the law was created with the idea of helping keep people safe. And so in this country, it is a crime to physically or sexually abuse your spouse, intimate partner, child. And again, domestic violence is never the survivor's fault. And why is that? It's because we're going to start talking here about the power and control. So when we speak on this, if I talk about this with a client and we go sort of in depth, I might pull out a power and control wheel, which looks like what's on your screen. But there's a lot of information on there. So on the next slide, I have a simpler version. But what you'll see is on the outside, there's a ring of overt violence that we might see possibly, the physical, the sexual. And then internally are more subtle, maybe not as noticeable things. But this power and control wheel was originally created by, it's called the Duluth Model. And any specific population, there are versions of this created specific to that population. But we can think of this wheel as a diagram of tactics that the abusive partner is using to keep their partner in the relationship. So it might be subtle, it might not be, but the idea of using the coercion, the threats, intimidation, the verbal attacks, wearing someone down, isolation. If they can't reach out to their friends, because every time they do, it turns into a fight at home. So then they start to just say, oh, well, I can't make it tonight, or I can't hang out this weekend. And slowly, if I am the partner who's experiencing this, my world becomes smaller and smaller, more focused on my partner. Minimizing, denying, blaming. This is where gaslighting comes in. That idea of, I never said that. We never talked about that. You are crazy. What are you talking about? Using loved ones, using the children as a manipulation point, abusing their authority, economic control, as we spoke to earlier. And I want to give a comparison model here of, in a relationship that's based on equality, we're going to see that what comes out of that is a lot of wonderful behaviors and things like trust and support and shared responsibility, equal access to the funds in the relationship, non-threatening behavior, respect, right? But when the seed of the relationship is not equality, when it's power and control, what we see is that actions grow from that seed. So the belief system is around, oh, well, I deserve, that person is mine, they are my property, they are my possession. So I get to do this and I get to have the control. Then what we see are the behaviors growing out of it, of hitting, yelling, threats, all the things we've already mentioned. So the actions come from the beliefs. But if a partner says, oh, I'll change, I'll change, I'll change. They say that they'll change the actions. What we know is that the seed is still there. So what's going to happen? Well, one of the things in our field that we talk about a lot as well is the cycle of violence. That idea that this commonly occurs where an incident will happen, and then the abusive partner says they'll change their actions. And then for a while, it feels really nice. Maybe it feels kind of like a honeymoon period again. And it's the person I fell in love with at the start. And they said that they changed. They said that they'll do the dishes and they'll go to church. They'll go to temple. They'll go to counseling. Maybe this time they'll change. Maybe this time they love me enough that it'll be different. But at some point, the tension starts to build again. And you feel like you're walking on eggshells to keep it from happening. But at some point, an incident of violence is going to occur. We can't predict the timing of the cycle, but what we do know is it only grows stronger. and it will continue to grow stronger unless some true change occurs, whether that be that the survivor leaves the relationship or that the abusive partner takes true accountability and works to change their belief systems around their rights, around their belief to their right around the power and control in the relationship. So again, if the seed remains and they're only focusing on the surface level, that they're going to change their actions, then the actions are going to return and stronger. We can think of it like weeds, where if they're cut off at the surface level, they're going to grow back stronger because the root system is still there and continues to grow. So the only way to get rid of the weeds, the abusive actions, is to go below the surface and get at the root, which is the belief system around power and control. Okay, so that's sort of a baseline that I'm going to give around the topic of domestic violence. I'm going to read the question here out loud really quickly and then see if it's a moment to, let's see, how can we as social service workers create change in police response to 911 abuse calls that are not evidently physical abuse? For example, when my husband called 911 on stalking and emotional abuse of a neighbor, the police contacted the victim and told her to stop being childish and just let the abuser in the house. Yeah. You may have heard a little bit of a tone of voice when I said that the law was created with the intent to help. Unfortunately, we'll find that a lot of times it doesn't. There are a lot of really wonderful police officers who do a lot of really great work. And then as well, there are a lot of partners who can be really engaging when the police officer arrives at the door and says there's nothing wrong and no, there's no big deal and we're fine, and then they head off. I think as social service providers, for one thing, for example, is we can encourage people to call CIT officers. They have received extra training around crisis and trauma response. They are trauma informed, trained, and so we can request that a CIT officer be the one who comes out for the call, and they might be a little bit more sensitive to the nuances of the situation. It can also be that we connect them with service providers who could go with them to a police station to make a report if that's the safe thing that they want to do at the moment. It could be talking to them about protective orders and looking at further options that they could do for their safety. Utilizing the police if they want to and feel safe doing that. And if not, what are other safety options that we can do? We can be an active part of their safety planning. And if we don't feel like we personally have all the skills, then we can connect them with other service providers who do. For example, that would be something that anyone on my team would be happy to speak further with a person on. Okay, I'm going to jump into the possible impacts on children now. So as we talk about this, I want to speak to quickly that there are a lot of factors that go into how any individual child will respond when they're living with domestic violence in their environment. So different factors like how serious, how frequent the violence is. Has the child ever been physically hurt? What's the relationship with the two partners involved? How old is the child? What other stresses are going on? And also what kind of positive things are going on in a child's life? What kind of coping skills do they have, both genetically and what they've learned? So there's a lot of things that go into it. But to start out, I would like us to look at this picture and consider it as if our lives were a glass of water, then myself, I would be the full glass on the right for how much life I've lived at this point. A child would be in the middle and a baby would be on the left. So when something terrible happens, one specific instant, like a car crash or an earthquake, it's like some black ink has been dropped into our glasses. It's the same event for all of us, but the effect and our response to it is going to be very different. The one who is most impacted by the event is actually the youngest person who experienced it. Because developmentally, as an adult, my brain is fully developed. I have the lived years of life to be able to put some context to it and understand that while that was one bad thing, but the whole world isn't bad. Not every person in the world is bad. But for a child or a baby whose brain is still developing, and they don't have those lived years of context, and they might not be able to express themselves yet at all, or express themselves well, the impact is much stronger. And that's just for one event. It is even further exacerbated, made even worse in situations of complex trauma. So it's not just one isolated event, but it's something like domestic violence that happens over and over and again. And so the brain continues to learn that it's not safe and starts to react accordingly, where it's carrying these levels of toxic stress. And when I talk about stress, stress itself is not a bad thing. I bet if I took my pulse right now, it would be very high. And that's just the nerves of doing a presentation. It's my body reacting, increasing my heart rate, bringing a little bit of stress hormone levels so that my body can respond as it's needed. So I'm not sleepy at the moment, right? My body is alert, it's ready. So like if a child is taking a test at school, maybe they're taking a test on the different types of tigers, they're going to have a positive level of stress that then afterwards they return back to their normal. A tolerable level of stress, so maybe it's something more serious, maybe it's that natural disaster, maybe the child went to the zoo and the tiger that they saw there escapes, and it's a really scary thing, it's a big thing that happened. But if they have a safe adult with them who helped them be safe and took care of it and talked with them afterwards to help them process, then that level of stress goes back again down to that normal level because they had that supportive relationship that helped them. But toxic stress, where our body stays at this heightened level when we're responding to abuse, neglect, and we don't have that supportive, caring, trusted adult. What happens for the child is that these stress hormones just overwhelm the body and the brain. The brain is producing these stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, and it's just staying firing the whole time. Instead of it being the tiger at the zoo, they are living with a tiger in their house. So their body is staying on all the time of, I'm not safe, I need to be alert. Is the tiger awake? Is the tiger going to attack? Is the tiger asleep? Right? But those levels and maintaining that level of stress all the time is really harmful, both to the function and the development and the structure of the brain. Especially for young children, 0 to 3, their brains are developing so fast. And if it's only getting this survival, fight, flight, freeze, then the rest of the brain isn't developing. The logic, the long-term decision-making, that doesn't have a chance to develop because it's only focused on surviving. The other thing is that this toxic stress in childhood has lifelong impacts for both mental and physical health. So we're going to jump into that a little bit. The question, what age is the baby, newborn, or are you referring to a toddler? Well, we're going to jump in on the developmental impacts at the different stages for children. Whoever the youngest one is in the room, if it's a baby, if it's a toddler, they are being seriously impacted by domestic violence happening in their environment. So when we're talking about the youngest ones, we'll go birth to age 5. Sometimes people ask me if a child is too young to understand what's really happening, then how is it that they're having negative effects? But the reality is that children don't need to understand to respond both emotionally and physically. So, for example, a very young child, their heart rate goes up in response to adults screaming or crying. Even in the womb, if a mom if a pregnant woman is experiencing a lot of distress and high anxiety, that stress hormone gets passed through the placenta and affects the development of the fetus. So we will see in babies developmental regression. Maybe they were starting to crawl and now they're not. Maybe they were starting to walk and they've gone backwards. Maybe they were doing pretty well with potty training and now they're back in diapers. Lots of separation anxiety. They won't be comforted. The crying just continues. You might see things acted out in play that they are seeing in their environment. Yeah, thank you, Kristen. The mind may not remember, but the body absolutely keeps the score. For children in the range of 6 to 11, again, that heightened alert response, nightmares, sleep disruptions. We may see a lot of impact within the school setting. They might be having difficulty concentrating, might have some regression issues. They also might be the A+ student. You might see not only is it underachieving, it's also overachieving, if that's the place where they can have some control in their lives. We'll see a lot of kids who are, I don't want to say misdiagnosed, but are given the diagnosis of ADHD because what's occurring in their home life means that developmentally they don't have the words to express it yet, so it comes out as energy and distraction. And so then they're given the diagnosis of ADHD when actually what's occurring is a lot of trauma in the home. So also withdrawal, numbing, they might speak to a lot of physical complaints because again, emotionally they can't explain it. So headaches, stomach aches. And I agree, the book, The Body Keeps the Score, is an excellent book, excellent. If we're speaking a little bit older children, antisocial behavior, really backing off from the family, maybe spending a lot of time away from the family. They might take on a really strong parental role if they have younger siblings. Impulsive or reckless behavior. And again, if they were experiencing a lot of trauma in their young childhood years, then developmentally their brain might have had some disruptions as it was trying to develop the impulse control and those things. So truancy, substance abuse, their own involvement in unhealthy relationships, self-harming behavior, depression, anxiety, suicide ideation. So we're going to watch a video, and I want to give that as a heads up to you. It's from Sesame Street, but it's Sesame Street in communities because they have done a really great growth from just the PBS shows. They also have this website where there's a lot of resources and strategies and support for community providers. So they've created this video. It's 2 minutes. So if you would prefer not to watch it, you can go take a quick bathroom break. It is animated, but what I would like is for us to pay attention to. What I'd like is if you all are willing to share in the chat some of the things that maybe you noticed about the responses from the baby and the sister. Outside of the strong debate between is it eensy weensy or itsy bitsy spider, we won't get into that. But when it comes to the responses that we saw, what are some of the things that you noticed? Yeah, baby was crying. The older siblings started out being able to comfort, but then became too overwhelmed. Absolutely. Saw some withdrawal. Yeah, the older sibling had to go and get sort of their comfort animal, that teddy bear. Yeah, and feel free to continue to add to it what you saw. Some of the things that I noticed, and you all spoke to already, was that the older child had that immediate heightened alert. They were playing, it was age appropriate, and then suddenly raised voices. What is that? She quickly jumped into that parent mode of trying to comfort the baby, but it became too much. As you said, it overwhelmed her coping skills. And so to me, in my non-counselor, non-professional role, it seemed as though she disassociated from what was going on, that she went inside and had to go and get that comfort animal and was off on her own. As you said, the shadows became scary, right? Yeah. The baby started out crying, looked for comfort from the sister. And the thing that was really telling to me was that when the sister went away, the baby stopped crying and started self-soothing by sucking their thumb. And you'll hear that from people who work in orphanages, that sometimes the baby's room is silent, because when a baby learns that by crying they're not going to get their needs met, then they stop and they start self-soothing. But the impact on that developmentally, to learn so early on that I can't trust that someone's going to pick me up if I need that comfort, is overwhelming. But I also want to speak to the importance of that role that the grandpa had, that importance of being that safe, caring, consistent adult. I'm going to hope that he wasn't the one arguing in the other room. I guess that wasn't clear. I made the assumption that he was a safe adult and not one of the people participating in the argument in the other room. I'm going to go ahead and go with that he was just a good guy coming in and providing that support. So we've touched on a little bit of the developmental impacts, and honestly, that could be a 5-day conversation. There's so much that we could unpack with that. But I also want to get into the long-term impacts, because that chronic toxic stress, living in that red alert mode, be it months, years, has such an impact on our bodies long-term, because that stress, that adrenaline and cortisol that's flowing, at some point starts to damage our heart, it keeps our blood pressure high, it weakens the heart, the circulatory system. And so we're going to jump into talking about ACEs for a moment. I'm not going to go super deep with it. For some of you, you may be very familiar with ACEs. For some of you, it might be a new concept. And so I wanted to give a baseline for that as well. So when I'm speaking of ACEs, it's the acronym for Adverse Childhood Experiences. It was a study done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente between the years of 1995 to 97. And the original point of it, they were going to study obesity. And they interviewed 17,000 people. It's the largest study of its kind at the time. And what they found was that they kept pulling in so much information about negative things that had occurred in a person's childhood, and then seeing this correlation to impacts in their well-being as an adult. And so an amazing amount of information has been able to be pulled from that. So with ACEs, there are 10 different areas where they are asking questions of, well, adverse experiences that people had in their childhood. So it could be abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, sexual abuse. Did they experience neglect, whether it be physical or emotional? Within their household, were there things going on like mental illness of someone in the home, a relative who was in jail? Was their mother treated violently? Did anyone struggle with substance use? Was there divorce? And what they found was that there was a distinct correlation between the number of ACEs people had and that long-term impact. So people have an ACE score of 0 to 10. And each type of trauma just counts as one, no matter how much someone experienced it. So you can kind of think of an ACE score as like the cholesterol score of childhood trauma. What they found with this studying 17,000 people was that individuals had very high percentages that surprised them, like 28% had experienced physical abuse. Within the household, 27% had someone in the home struggling with substance use. What they found was that of the 17,000 study participants, 64% had at least one ACE. So like almost 2/3 of the population. And further studies since then have held up those numbers as something that we could extrapolate to mean the population at large. So the thing with this is that as the number of ACEs increase, so does that risk for negative health outcomes. What they found was that, again, 2/3 have at least one ACE. And for people with 4 ACEs, alcoholic parent, experiencing racism, someone in jail, physical abuse, what they found was that with 4 ACEs, they had a huge risk of chronic health problems as an adult: heart disease, cancer, diabetes, suicide, alcoholism. And what was particularly startling was that the people who were studied were mostly white, middle and upper middle class, college educated, and all of them had jobs and great health care because they worked for they were members of Kaiser Permanente. So that impact, what they found was that people with an ACE score of 4 were twice as likely to be smokers. They were 7 times more likely to be alcoholic. With an ACE score of 4, their chances of having emphysema or chronic bronchitis was nearly 400%. And attempted suicide was 1,200%. So with high ACE scores, people are more likely to be violent, to have more marriages, broken bones, drug prescriptions, autoimmune diseases. And the most startling thing that they pulled from the study was that people with an ACE score of 6 or higher had the risk of losing 20 years off their lifespan. And again, these are things that they experienced as children, where they didn't have the ability to just up and change their environment. This was happening to them in a time they didn't have any control about it. They didn't have any say over it, but it was having this huge impact for the rest of their life. So we're going to watch another video. It is, again, 2 minutes, quick. And it's done by a website called stresshealth.org, which is great. Highly recommend it. It's called The Things We Carry. And the reason I want us to watch it is because with this heavy information of the impacts of domestic violence on children, the developmental impacts on them, the long-term impacts that they could carry, I also want us to start moving into what can we do about it.
When I was a kid, I used to think, if I could just grow up, if I could just get through, I could leave all this behind. But that's not how it works. Everything that happened is still part of me. But there's hope. I learned how to heal from toxic stress and make sure the cycle ends with me.
Learn more about toxic stress and how you can stop it at stresshealth.org.
I appreciate the message in this video because it truly is that it's never too late to get help. At any point in someone's life, if they can start in some type of trauma-focused treatment, the brain wants to heal. So going back, revisiting, recovering can have a huge impact on the effects of domestic violence in someone's life. And I saw here in the chat, thank you all for what you're sharing, that yeah, Kristen, that some parents believe the younger the child, the more they don't understand. I'll hear that a lot from my clients saying, well, you know, we wait till the children are asleep, or we do it once they're down for the night, or the door is closed. They don't know. And that's why I want to speak to this, of saying that actually the one who's the most impacted is the baby in the crib. You know, like the 12-year-old, let's get him into counseling. The 5-year-old, let's get some play therapy going. But this baby who can't express anything yet, well, what can we do there? And so that's where I'm talking with my clients about the well, this leads in nicely, the resilience. We're going to move into resilience now. The idea of what can we do to unpack the experience that they had. So for a baby, is it a lot of snuggles, a lot of cuddles, a lot of time in the arms, feeling the heartbeat of the mom or the dad or whatever the safe adult is in their life, trying to bring back in the safety and the consistency and the stability into a child's life. And thank you, Noelle, the idea of, it's a good point to speak to, that ACEs was done within the context of being within the US and works within that context, but not maybe as well if we bring in the factors outside of, you know, if someone lived growing up in a setting of war, or for if they lived in a refugee camp for 20 years and their experiences look incredibly different. So I appreciate the idea that there's a group looking at rewriting the ACEs and adding additional categories such as natural disasters, refugee status, discrimination, historical trauma as well, generational trauma, etc. So thank you for mentioning that, Mom. So with resilience, the fact that we have focused so much on the heavy, highlighting the price that children are paying for growing up in unsafe environments, the thing that I appreciate is that that very same study also highlighted the fact that all of those risk factors that we've spoken to can be offset by having that one dependable, caring adult. And it doesn't have to be a father or a mother specifically, or even a closer distant relative. It can be someone within their community. It can be a coach, a teacher, a mentor of some kind. And so as we talk about resilience, we as community members who care have a huge point of being able to have impact in a positive way in children's lives around us. So I do want to say directly, no ifs, ands, or buts, that if a person has a high ACE score, it doesn't mean they're doomed. That idea of the brain is plastic, it wants to heal. As soon as a toxic stress is removed, the body wants to start healing. So if it's in the childhood that the child is able to be in an environment that is safe and stable, they start healing. If it's as an adult and they start to unpack some of that, they can start healing. I like to give the example of, I have a scar here on my hand. At one time in my life, I worked in a vet, and while I was working at the vet clinic, a cat just straight up attacked my hand. And it was gross and ugly, and it hurt a lot because it was a very deep wound, and it took a long time to heal, and I had to do multiple steps to help it heal. And to start with, you know, it's painful, it's raw, it's a very raw wound. And then I did the things that I needed to help it start healing, and it scabbed over. And so then the scab was really fragile. I could tell the body was starting to heal, but like anything could have ripped it off and the pain would happen again. But then further healing happened, and now what I'm left with is a scar. So, well, what's written here on the slide, that having a good support system, good relationships, high self-esteem, healthy friendships, a child isn't not necessarily going to forget what they experienced in their childhood, but if they can learn healthy ways to deal with it, then as they mature, as they get help, they have much better chances for having a healthy adulthood. So using that example of the wound on my hand, I'm left with a scar, and I'm not going to forget the experience. I can look at my hand and remember it happening, but it doesn't hurt me anymore because I took the steps I needed to for it to heal. So it's never going to leave me 100%, but it doesn't still impact my daily life now. So it's a bit of a clunky analogy, but that idea of if we take the steps to heal, it doesn't have to continue to stop our ability to live our daily lives in the now. So we're going to watch another video. It is 1 minute, and it's the science of childhood trauma, because I feel like, again, the website Futures Without Violence, highly recommend it. Lots of great info on there. And they made a video that very succinctly pulls all of this together, of the impact of negative things of trauma, but then the resilience of the brain.
The emotional effects of childhood trauma are well known, but new scientific research reveals that a child's positive and negative experiences can shape and reshape the brain. Research suggests that the more a child witnesses violence, the more neural connections are created in regions of the brain that involve fear, anxiety, and impulsiveness, while fewer are created in regions that involve reasoning, planning, and behavioral control. The good news is the young brain is malleable or plastic, and fostering stable, supportive relationships can prevent or help reverse this damage, resulting in lifelong benefits for the child's learning, behavior, and overall health. So how can you help a child in your life? Just remember these 5 healing gestures. Celebrate them with a compliment or by applauding their efforts. Comfort them by staying calm and patient. Listen to them and show an interest in their passions. Collaborate with them by asking their opinions, and inspire them with new ideas. With these everyday gestures, you can help a child look forward to a bright future.
I went ahead and wrote out what they put in that video because it's good, but it's quick. So just to repeat what it said within the video, things that we can do are to celebrate a child with a compliment, applauding their efforts. I'd like each one of you to just think back to your own childhoods and think of that one person who immediately comes to mind for you, who supported you and made you feel like you were smart and talented and you were good at something, and they encouraged you. For me, it was my swim coach. He immediately comes to mind for me. That idea of, oh, I'm good at this. I'll work harder because I want him to be proud of me, and I'm okay at this. All right. And that was huge for me. Comforting them. Let us as the adults be the ones who stay calm and patient, right? Listening to them, showing an interest in their passions, encouraging them in that. Collaborating with them, asking their opinions. How huge is it when an adult asks a kid for their opinion? And then inspiring them with new ideas. And we're going to go into this more because the one thing I hate in a presentation is when I hear all the bad stuff and then they're like, but there's hope. Bye. I'm like, no, I want tangible. I want things that I can do today to make a difference. So we're going to get into that more. Some really practical protective factors. If we're talking the, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if a kid doesn't have their basic needs met, they're not going to be able to move up and move forward in their life, in their development, in feeling safe. So let's look at, do they have enough food to eat at home? What kind of food are they eating? Do they get exercise? Are they getting enough sleep? Do they have a safe place to sleep? Can they sleep through the night? Is it disrupted? Are there bed bugs? Do they have enough blankets? Are they getting enough water? Maybe all they're drinking is juice. Maybe we throw a little bit of water in there. Helping them regulate their senses. We're talking about children who have experienced a lot of really hard stuff. They might need some help understanding you are currently safe. So that behavior, we're going to look at changing that, but you are currently safe. And then looking at the environmental issues, because again, a child who is walking around on high alert, if they live with that tiger at home, then they're going to react out of fear all the time because they can't, it's not safe for them to lower their guard. So they might react really strongly to the bell at the end of the class, or really strong smells, or lots of lights and things. So maybe it's in our environment that we can help them. And I said this at the very beginning, but I'm going to read it again, that the strong relationship is the most important factor. If they can have a safe, caring, consistent adult, so much of the negative can be unpacked, and we can help them in that building of a foundation for their future. As we do that, there are some important things to take into account. And the first and foremost is taking care of yourself. It's a cliche, but it's that idea of you can't pour from an empty cup. And vicarious trauma is a real thing. So in my field, working with survivors of domestic violence, almost every day I'm hearing horror stories. And if I want to have any kind of longevity in this field, I have to figure out how to not carry that home with me, because otherwise I'm going to go home and go to sleep and have a nightmare. So what do my boundaries look like that I am not carrying that weight along with me? If I'm working with children and I am a safe person to them, and so they divulge abuse to me, how do I handle that in a loving way, in a calm way in the moment, but then also don't carry that with me for the next 2 years? Vicarious trauma is a real thing where we take on the trauma that we are hearing that someone else had lived. And so what do our boundaries look like? What does self-care look like? And that has become a cliche term, but the reality of its importance cannot be understated. What do you do that cares for yourself well, so that by caring and being in a good place yourself, you can care for someone else well? Okay, so with children specifically, directly with them, reaching out, connecting, supporting, assuring them that the abuse is not their fault. Jumping back into the development of children's brains, children are very self-centered for a very long time. And I don't say that in a judgmental way. I mean that literally their brain has developed only so far, and they can't picture themselves outside of the role of protagonist. So everything revolves around them in their world. And so if the parents are mad and yelling in the other room, then it must be because I didn't clean my room well enough. It was my fault that this is happening in the other room. So reminding a child over and over, the abuse was not their fault. It is not their fault. It will never be their fault. Being a good listener, if you are a safe person and they're willing to speak with you, that is a huge honor. So interest, empathy, availability, answering their questions honestly, but in age-appropriate ways. So they might be asking, why did these bad things happen? And you don't have a good answer. So maybe it's just as simple as saying, sometimes bad things happen that we can't explain. Respecting a child's cultural background. There's a lot of research that shows that a child with strong cultural identity, that's actually a really powerful protective factor for them, so we can encourage that. Don't make promises you can't keep. You cannot promise a child that you will keep them safe. You can't, that's outside of your control. But you can use really specific language to say, I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. But don't tell them you're going to keep them safe, because that's just another adult that lied to them after something bad happens again. The idea of reducing stress, building coping skills, maybe it's modeling it to them. Boy, when I feel stressed, I do, what has helped them feel better in the past? And then we all get to see those moments where, like, man, Kevin is really good at art. And look at Sally with the soccer ball. Man, so like if we can connect them with further things that are going to encourage the things that they already love, that's huge. Helping children manage their emotions, helping them, guiding them through those day-to-day strategies, because a lot of their responses are going to be fear-based. They are living with a tiger in their house. So they're going to react if they see a paper tiger drawn, they're going to react, their brain is going to react as though the tiger is real. Which, by the by, there is a documentary called Paper Tigers, and it is excellent. Highly recommend it. You can watch it for free on their website. Just Google Paper Tigers film or documentary. And it's about trauma in children's lives and a school that decided to take into account all of that and really implement trauma-informed care within the school and the impact that it had. So if a child is reacting out of fear, and so is using challenging or difficult behavior, then it's on us as the adult to recognize where that's coming from, and we can help correct the behavior, but doing so by reminding them that they are safe, that wasn't the right response for these circumstances, but that they are safe, and we're going to ask for a different type of response from them. Having positive peer relationships that they get to see modeled as healthy relationships around them, being a role model, being a mentor. Who are their anchors? Who are the important people in their lives? Who are the safe people in their lives? Already spoke to it a little bit, but that idea of having a calm environment, they're hypervigilant. So helping them remove a lot of busy sensory things can help them feel like they have a little bit more control in a world where they don't have a lot of control. And then looking for what other resources are out there to connect a child to, what other supportive resources are we out there that we can work together to support them. I want you to remember back to the first video that we watched, The Brain Hero, where they spoke to the links between policy, parenting, and brain architecture. And we've talked a lot about brain architecture, and we've talked about the role that the parents play, whether positive or negative, if there's domestic violence occurring in the environment, but also policy. I wanted to touch on that for a moment, because directly with children, when I have an opportunity, I want to support them and care for them and be that positive adult. Additionally, as an active, caring community member, I can look at areas where I can encourage policies to be in place that look at building the community supports that are going to help all of us. So quality childcare, voting for strong schools, accessible transportation for everyone, right? It is in everyone's interest, and it benefits everyone. Everyone reaps the benefits. Because if we think, again, back to the ACEs, and for the people who have an ACE score of 4 or more and all of the adult health issues that they're experiencing, then if we can roll backwards and make differences that impact the life of the child, so that hopefully that score of 4 doesn't happen, and then all of the costs of the medical concerns that they're going to have in their adulthood don't happen, then this preventative measure in their childhood has a huge benefit to the entire society, as one way that we could extrapolate that out of the importance for our community to step forward in this. So as a few last resources, because I want to come back to the fact that not only speaking about the impact of DV on children, but domestic violence in general, I want to make sure that we all have the resources of the hotlines if we needed to report. In the state of Indiana, every adult is a mandated reporter, so we have the responsibility that if we know of or suspect child abuse or neglect, we need to make that report. So there's a national child abuse hotline. There's also the DCS, the Indiana Child Abuse Hotline. And then because we're talking about DV, I included the National Domestic Violence Hotline. What we've been finding during this pandemic, during COVID-19 is that numbers are actually really down. The Child Abuse Hotline is reporting them down, which in theory maybe sounds positive, but for those of us who work in this field, it's actually highly concerning, because those supportive adults who are normally in the circle around the child are not currently there. So the children are not interacting with the teachers and the after school programs and their coaches and the other people. They're home, and they're at home with the tiger. So we are expecting that as the country's restrictions start lessening and things start reopening, that we're going to see these numbers escalate dramatically. So having these resources, having these numbers, maybe you save them in your phone so that you can access it as quickly as you need to. Additionally, if you have an interaction with someone who is experiencing domestic violence, we spoke to this quickly earlier on, but the idea of being a part of their safety plan. And what that means is asking what they need to feel safe. Because the last thing I want to do as a caring person in their life is to also take control. That is what they've been experiencing in that relationship. So the last thing I should do is come in and say, oh, well, you need X, Y, Z, and I'm going to call and I'm going to do, no, hit the brakes. What do they want? What do they feel they need to feel safe right now? And how can I be a part of that? So do they have a safe place to go? Do their children? Do they need help calling for help? And what does that look like? Do they want 911 called, or do they want something else? And then respecting that. And then just as a quick note, so that you know, old cell phones, as long as they can hold a charge, they don't have to have minutes or any kind of plan. If they can hold a charge, they can call 911. So if you have a couple, if you have an extra one hanging out in a drawer somewhere, see if there's someone who needs it, because it could be the difference of being able to reach out for help if their phone has been broken or taken or lost, something happened. Here's a slide of local domestic violence focused agencies. So ourselves, Families First, La Plaza specifically works with the Latino population, and they have a domestic violence survivor advocate. Julian Center is a well-known resource as well. I put a couple in different parts of the city, so like Prevails of the North, Beacon of Hope South, a couple nearby counties as well. And as a reminder, we will be sending out this PowerPoint as a PDF, so you'll have these numbers. And then additionally, I sent to Vicki earlier a document with this list of resources and a few more that if you want to research more, if you want to go deeper into studying this information, these are some really great links that you can go to that have just a plethora of information that you can just do a deep dive into. So that'll be getting sent out to you as well. So we're going to have a 5 minutes for questions that we can do here in the chat, or Vicki, if you would prefer that we unmute, I'm okay with that as well. But I do just want to take that moment to thank you all. This is not an easy topic, but we see the importance of each one of us taking up our part in this, that we take our role and run with it to prevent domestic violence, to care for the children and support our community, because it benefits all of us as a whole, that each one of us experience a healthy, safe, and violence-free life. And then this is our agency's information. We're located on Meridian Street. We do have a 24-hour crisis line if you wanted to pass that along to anyone who may be in need of that. Additionally, we are a rape crisis center, so if someone experienced sexual assault and needed to speak to someone or know of resources, whatever kind of support they might need, they could also reach out through that 24-hour sexual assault crisis line. So thank you very much.